Coming up on today's episode of PSN, para-kayaker and alpine skier Andrea Nelson joins the show to share her experience and success both in the water and on the slopes. You won't want to miss it. Let's get started.
Welcome to Parasport Nation with Alex Smyth and Nathan Clement.
This is Parasport Nation. I'm your host, Alex Smyth, and as always, I am joined by co-host Nathan Clement. Nathan, it's a busy news day in the world of parasport.
Oh yeah, it's a major news day and just so much going on and so much happening this week, but also leading into the next couple weeks. It's a very busy time. And I know in Vancouver, we actually got our first snow day of the year. So it's feeling very wintry, especially for our PSN update.
Now, the PSN update.
For Canada's Para-Nordic team, a golden hat trick kicked off the Paralympic test event in Val di Fiemme, Italy. The trio of Derek Zaplonski, Mark Arends, and Brittany Hudak won a perfect 10 for 10 in shooting during the biathlon sprint pursuit, securing gold. Mark Arends wasn't done there. He continued to add to his storied career with another gold. Next up is the Biathlon World Championships next week in Slovenia. In archery, American Matt Stutzman has become the first para-athlete to be named Athlete of the Year by World Archery. This title comes off the heels of Stutzman's gold medal at the Paris Games. The American announced his retirement in late 2024 after a decorated career spanning 4 Paralympics from London 2012 to Paris 2024. In Slovenia, Canada's para-alpine team has been announced for the 2025 World Para-Alpine Championships in Maribor. The team is headlined by Kali Eriksson and his guide Sierra Smyth in the men's visually impaired classification. In the sitting class, Kurt Otway will represent the men. For the standing disciplines, Alexis Guimond and Michaela Gosselin will race for Canada. Keeping our ski boots on, Park City, Utah welcomes Canada's development team for the Huntsman Cup. And that's the PSN update.
And that's not where the news ends with the PSN update, because Nathan, you mentioned the competition in Slovenia. There's actually been a bit of a breaking news update and add on to that story. Take it away. Tell us more.
Yes, so at the Para-Alpine World Championships happening in Maribor, Slovenia, the downhill events have been canceled due to poor snow conditions. Now, this is something that was potentially going to happen there, and there was concerns leading into this where they had previous other events that were going to be taking place at this resort in Slovenia, where they had Women's World Cup events move from there to other parts of Europe. So this is something that was potentially forecasted. However, the Para-Alpine World Championships were set there, and there was no need or no real look at relocation or moving the event. Is there anything that you think is why they decided to stay in Slovenia, even though the snow was a concern there, Alex?
Well, yeah, so whenever you're talking about something like this, where it's a major competition, obviously it's the World Championships, so it's definitely a major competition. There's a lot of moving parts. And the one thing that is unique when you compare, para events opposed to able-bodied events, like the women's a competition that was able to move to another location, we have to consider accessibility. We don't know what the accessibility kind of standards or levels were like at the other locations. Maybe there were others that were considered, but maybe they didn't quite meet the standard of what was required for the athletes, the coaches, the teams competing at the competition. So I think accessibility plays into it. I think also resources plays into it. We're fully aware that when it comes to the parasport side of things, there's less funding, less money available, less resources available than there would be on the able-bodied side. So maybe financially they weren't able to make it work and move the competition on short notice to another destination. Overall, it's just such a shame because, the athletes were really excited, geared up, ready to go and compete. But unfortunately, we can't control the weather, right, Nathan? I mean, this is something that you have experienced being out in Vancouver during the 2010 Winter Games.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned Vancouver 2010, where they had to bring snow in from all parts of North America just to be able to run the mogul events or the downhill events up on Cypress Mountain, which was the same town I was in at that point and living in. And it just goes to show that you can't control the weather. But one thing that I've really realized, and I believe a lot of governing bodies are starting to realize the importance and what's possible when you combine events, when you bring in the able-bodied world championships and the para championships. And that's something that as a cyclist, as a paracyclist, we've really realized is such a vital and such an important part of these events is when you combine it just to make it easier for that access, because you're going to have that infrastructure there. And even it just brings that level up, where you have athletes on the able-bodied side, on the para side, really getting to meet each other for the first time, or continuing to grow friendships and camaraderie and that team chemistry, as we've gotten to know in the last 2 years with paracycling, where we had our world championships in 2023 in Scotland. Especially for the track athletes, being in that same venue in Glasgow was just phenomenal for the atmosphere, and phenomenal just to have everything condensed to about that week, where we're able to have a healthy flow, a healthy evolution of all the events and all the races that needed to take place. And then even this past year in 2024, where we had the Road World Championships in Zurich, Switzerland. And overall, it did extend the week a bit more, and it did allow for a little break in between the events and some difficulty finding practice times, especially on a closed course like what cycling needs. But overall, outside of some little issues there was a lot of great just continuity between the events, and it allowed for a good healthy flow in certain days. So overall, that's something I think a lot of these events need to look at, but it just comes down to how do you build that in, and how do you set up those infrastructures, how do you set up those kinds of situations where you're going to be able to maybe find major mountains, major locations that are going to allow these kinds of competitions to merge together and really grow. But also, I'm going to throw this to you, is it's important that we're going to different locations in different countries around the world. But also with that too, there's risks of weather, but also risks of those infrastructures. So how do you balance that while it's still trying to continue to integrate these sports?
Yeah, I think it's all about contingency plans at an event like this. It's so important. It's so vital. It's such a major stage. But maybe you also ease into it, maybe have less major competitions, maybe start off on smaller events just to see, kind of stress test the venues, the locations, the area, to see if they can accommodate athletes with disabilities, their teams, things like that, and then you grow from there. But yeah, having contingencies in place is key. And I think this is going to be something becoming more of a reality for winter sports all around. Snow may not always be there. It may be warmer than it normally is. I was looking at the weather. It's hovering just about zero, just above zero in Marieville right now. That should be able to produce some snow if you do it artificially, but you can't control the weather, as you say. It's just unfortunate, but it's canceled, and hopefully lessons can be learned going forward. And ironically, Nathan, this is something where it's a bit of a through line where we're talking about para-alpine, because we had a chance to catch up with Andrea Nelson, former para-kayaker, now a member of Team Canada's development para-alpine team. We chatted with her before this news broke, but here's our interview with Andy Nelson. Andy, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
So obviously you've had quite a bit of success with with Canada's developmental para-alpine team. Can talk a bit about what that experience has been like, especially from transitioning from being in para-kayak to now being on the alpine developmental team.
Yeah. I was skiing while I was kayaking as well, kind of in the off season. And before the games leading to Tokyo, I kind of took a little bit of a step back. It was also COVID then. So skiing wasn't my priority, but I knew I really wanted to get back to it after Tokyo. I just really like the winter sports, and I've skied my entire life. I grew up skiing, so it was really good to get back. And yeah, trying my hand at racing. I wasn't sure at first whether I would like it or not. I just figured I'd give it a try, but I really like it. And my goal last year was to make the development team for Canada. So first year on that, and, getting lots of training in, lots of racing in, and seeing where that leads me.
We're in the middle of the season right now. You just recently picked up some medals in Colorado. How has the season gone so far? And is there any competitions that you're really targeting going into February and March?
Yeah, Winter Park, Colorado races went pretty well. Like you said, I came home with some medals, which is always nice. It's hard in skiing because a big focus is the points versus medals. So kind of different from some other sports. You have to lower your points to make like a World Cup level and stuff like that. So I'm working towards lowering my points so I could compete at some World Cups, hopefully later this year. Right now, what we're looking forward to is racing in Utah next week. So in Park City, Utah, there's some races happening and should be a good amount of para athletes there. It's always a fun time down there. So looking forward to those races.
And how do you feel when you are in the midst of a season like this, where you're getting races like every week, every other week? Like, how are you balancing things and making sure that you're catching your breath, you're still doing the training, and then you're prepared for when these competitions are taking place?
Yeah, so with the development team, we're basically traveling 3 weeks out of every month, and then we'll generally have a week off to kind of rest and recharge and refocus and step away a bit. It can be a lot. The season changes more than other sports, just with snow conditions and, races being canceled for all sorts of different weather events. Our plan changes week to week. So I kind of know what I'm expecting the rest of the month to look like, but it honestly changes all the time. So you just have to be adaptable and flexible and hear the new plan and go, okay, that's what we're doing next. So just being adaptable, I think.
Going back to kayaking for a second and even tying it into para-alpine, a lot of the things that people don't understand with para sports is the equipment and traveling with that equipment. How was that going from para kayak to now having different sit skis and different equipment needed for para-alpine?
Yeah, it's definitely a lot more equipment in skiing. In kayaking, you don't really travel with your boat ever, just like your custom seat and footboard, which is definitely an important piece of traveling with that. But with skiing, we kind of look ridiculous going through an airport. I have like 6 or 7 bags at all times. I'm bringing 6 or 7 pairs of skis, and I only ski on one ski. So the people who are skiing on 2 skis have even more than that. With sit skis, honestly, I use a bike bag, so probably from something similar to what you have, Nathan. And we pop that in a bike bag, and you can't bring it as a carry-on, so you really hope for the best. Mine has a lot of wheelchair signs taped to it, so hoping that it'll be handled nicely. But yeah, equipment plays a huge part. We've really this year been tweaking my bucket a lot. So in sit ski, we call kind of what I sit in the bucket, and just changing angles and my backrest and all sorts of things, because it's so important. It's basically like my ski boot, and it needs to be as tight as possible and move with my body as best as it can, but also still giving me room to move around. So equipment is an ongoing thing that's always being adjusted, like a lot of para sports, but I found more so in skiing. There's just so many adjustments.
You talked about how, during the off season when you were kayaking, that you still enjoyed doing the skiing. Why did you kind of make that transition to now pursuing the alpine side of things full time and trying to, make the developmental team, but continue to pursue it seriously?
Yeah, I think the short answer is I just enjoy it more. I think it's more fun. No shade at canoe kayak. I really got into that sport and I did like it, but a sprint sport for me isn't my strong suit anyways. I think something that's a bit more dynamic and changing, and there's a lot of different disciplines in skiing, suits my, ADHD and other things better. So that's part of it. The other part is that I really like having a winter sport where I can get outside in the winter. I've always been a really outdoorsy person. And I just wanted to pursue some other things in the summer. I built a camper van out and have gotten, into a lot of hiking and kind of use my summer to do other things. So yeah, the off-season timing is also another reason, I think.
You mentioned it, you love the outdoors and you've done a lot of different activities. Is there anything like with the camper van, any like favorite locations, favorite places that you've been to on the road?
Oh, that's really hard. There's just so many wonderful places. The Yukon is really, I just absolutely loved the Yukon, and just kind of sticking to a Canadian answer right now. That is somewhere I would recommend everyone go. It's just really, really beautiful and just surprising how vast and empty everything is compared to all the trails and stuff I'm used to elsewhere, closer to cities where it's like really, really busy. It was, yeah, just really beautiful everywhere.
And what about from the alpine side of things? Like, where's your favorite place to ski, whether it's for training or competition, that you've had a chance to travel to and ski?
Oh, that's also hard to answer because the issue with when we are training to race is you just ski one hill over and over and over again. Like we honestly just train on the same hill that we're racing on and we ski one run. So it's probably a different answer versus if I was like free skiing and getting to explore a mountain more. But I think I really enjoyed Sun Peaks and would love to go back to that and be able to explore a bit more of the mountain. But yeah, honestly, out in BC and Alberta, there's just like so many great places, and same with down in Colorado. So yeah, hard to choose for sure.
As an athlete that competed in Tokyo in 2020, is there anything that you're really trying to draw on now as you try to chase after Milano in 2026 in Paralpine?
Definitely being a high performance athlete before definitely helps a lot of the mental side. They're very different sports in terms of like physicality, though I do think like my balance, learning to balance in a boat and kayaking helps my balance in a sit ski. But I think just the mental side of things, whether it's falling during races and just kind of having setbacks and still pushing forward, I think it's on par with, my journey in kayaking, and just having that pressure on you at certain races is not new to me. So while it's in a new sport, I think I'm just better equipped to kind of handle that pressure.
And can you talk a bit about that transition, that decision to go from kayaking to alpine? You mentioned like you preferred alpine. You prefer a lot of the the benefits of kind of pursuing the winter sport. But like, what was that transition like, having competed in Tokyo in kayaking to now, okay, you want to pursue the developmental team with the para alpine team?
Yeah, I really just took a break after Tokyo. I was finishing up some school in recreation therapy and working at a children's hospital, and honestly wasn't skiing very much that year either. But as that winter kind of passed, I started skiing more and more, and then got invited to Team Ontario. So it kind of happened really slowly of like, I didn't quit knowing I was going to pursue that right away. I just kind of needed to take a break and kind of focus on my career and other life goals. And at the same time, I was skiing on the weekends and in my free time, and then starting to race, and was like, oh, I kind of like this. Okay, I'll try Team Ontario and like see how that goes. And then I really started to enjoy it and have some success there. So I just kind of kept going with it. But it wasn't such a decision of like, okay, I'm going to retire in kayaking and pursue this. It just kind of happened more naturally.
During that time, you've also started to do a lot of media work with the Canadian Paralympic Committee. How has that experience been, being down at Santiago in 2023 for the Para-Pan Am Games, but also you were there in Paris in 2024. What was that like, covering the Paralympics and the Para-Pan Am Games?
That was amazing. Such a great experience. I really like talking to people and meeting people and getting to hear their stories and interview people. And I also found it was so fun, especially because the games I went to was the COVID games. We weren't allowed to go watch anything. We couldn't go watch any of our friends compete in any of the sports they trained so hard for, which was really hard, just gathered around a phone trying to watch. So especially because I know so many people that were there competing, it was just a lot of fun to be able to watch all these sports that I've heard so much about or watched virtually, but not been able to be there in person and feel the energy of the crowds and really get to see what the Canadian team is doing out there. So yeah, that experience has been great, and I absolutely want to continue with work in that area. It's just a lot of fun, and it's it's cool to see the other side of it. Very, very busy when you're working those events, but a lot less stressful when you're not competing.
And so which one do you prefer? Do you prefer the competing side or maybe a bit doing the media side?
I honestly really like both. I really like competing, but if I can continue to, on the summer side of things, do media and interviewing people, it's definitely something I really enjoy. And I don't know that I can choose. I think a good balance. I always need balance.
So we're not going to see you going down the hill with the microphone in your hand trying to talk to your competitor, Raisa.
I don't know how that'll work out in practicality. Yeah.
You've been able to travel as an athlete, but also in media too. Do you have any favorite food cities that you've been to that really stand out and they're special to you?
I mean, Tokyo, when we're talking about food, even not just, but, the cafeteria food, because we weren't really able to go outside to the local restaurants, though I have been there before and have to say I love Japanese food. But even the cafeteria, I was having sushi and dumplings like every day, obviously being healthy and eating my athlete intake, but just like one or two every day. Yeah, honestly, that would be a highlight for sure.
I'm curious, Andrea, when it comes to alpine, what is it that you love so much about that sport that is like, despite when you were competing in kayaking, that was always the one that kind of continues to draw you in, and there's something about it. So what is it that you love so much about alpine skiing?
I think it's a variety of things. Like I said, I've grown up skiing. My family used to take ski trips together, and I've always really enjoyed skiing and snowboarding. Being in the mountains, for one, is just so beautiful. Like, we get to travel around and go to these gorgeous mountaintops. But I think in terms of a sport, it's probably the more of an adrenaline sport side of it, faster paced. I'm a skydiver too, and have always been a little more into the adventurous sports. So I think it just is something there. I like going fast, and it's more dangerous as well. But yeah, I think it's just a little more exciting for me.
Do you have a dream mountain you haven't skied yet that you hope to go to?
I haven't skied in Europe yet. We're going to be going later this year, but I've never skied in Europe. So honestly, in the Alps, anywhere would be a dream. Not a specific mountain, just any of them would do, I think.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. Best of luck going forward. We're excited to continue to watch you race to some podium finishes as you race down those mountains and chase those speeds.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
That was our interview with Andrea Nelson with Canada's Para-Alpine Development Team. There was a lot of interesting tidbits in that conversation, Nathan. I still can't get out of my mind, though, the fact that, she competed in para kayak at the Paralympics, but then still decide, this isn't really the sport that I'm most passionate about. I want a bit more of that excitement, that adrenaline, that danger. So I want to go into para-alpine. I always get a kick out of that, where you get athletes who compete at such a high level and they're like, you know what? No, I'm still not satisfied with the sport I'm in. I want to go and try something else. I want to do something different. She's already seen early success in that change, in that transition point. So what did you feel when you kind of heard her talk about the rationale, looking to explore a different sport? Because that's something you did as well.
Yeah, I feel a connection to that. And I know so many other athletes feel that way too when they have switched those sports. And we've had friend of the show come on, Brianna Hennessy, and talk about her different sports that she's trying and all the activities she wants to go for. And it's one of those things where to do one sport is a privilege, to do that sport's an opportunity, is just a great gift. But also, when we feel it's right, we have to move on. We have to take those next steps. And there's no guarantees, there's no promises if you're even going to qualify for a Paralympic Games, let alone a World Championships, or just to represent your national team. But it's a test to that athlete and their character and their drive to completely switch something up when they were at that top level, and now they're really rediscovering who they are as an athlete. And as we've gotten to know many para-alpine skiers on this show, it's a tough road and it's a demanding sport to really chase these dreams, chase these goals, but just for her to take it on and follow that adrenaline kick, because I know for me, going from swimming to cycling, it's a lot more of an adrenaline kick when you're going down a hill at 50, 60K an hour versus the speeds you're going in a pool. But it's one of those things where we often go through these evolutions as a person, and we need to find what we love and really do that. And I think Andrea is the perfect example, whether that's a lot of her traveling that she's done, or even the media work that she's doing with the Canadian Paralympic Committee. She did a lot of great content, really highlighting and showing athletes throughout the Pan Am Games in 2023 and the Paralympics in 2024.
Yeah, and it's always great when you see an athlete who is aware, it's like, hey, I'm passionate about the sport, I'm passionate about what I'm doing, but I also realize too, hey, there's other avenues to this. There is kind of a career path being part of the media covering these competitions as well, being involved on that level, and how it can really inform kind of your interactions with media going forward as an athlete, because you are experiencing it on both sides of it. I also found it interesting, her talking a bit about what her schedule was like, and how sometimes she just doesn't know a week or 2 weeks out what where she's going, where she's being sent to, where she has to compete. As an athlete, like, how is cycling in terms of that? Do you have a bit more of a timeline and a planning stage that you can prepare yourself for moving around and going to compete? But also, if you're in that position, like, how would you feel if you don't have that time to really build up and prepare yourself for some competitions?
So for myself, my first World Championships in 2022, I didn't even know I was going to it till about a couple days before the race I had a week before our World Cup event in Quebec City, where the World Cup was. Our World Championships was in Baie-Comeau. So I get into a car after training that day in Quebec City, and as we're going to the hotel, the coaches ask all the other athletes to leave the car, and it's just me and the coaches in the car, and I'm like, oh no, what did I do already? Am I already in trouble or something? And I'm like going through the Rolodex in my head being like, oh no, what's going on here? And then they tell me that because of classification, because of how we think you're going to stand at World Championships, you've been selected to the World Championships team. And for me, fresh on that team, fresh into a new sport representing Canada, I jumped at it right away. It's exciting, but I also understand that other side too. And having spoken with other athletes, when you don't have that certainty, when you don't know really what's going to happen, and even for myself going to Rio in 2016 and for trials, like, even though our trials was in April and the games weren't until August and September, on that date when everything's coming down to that fine little line, it's just so nerve-wracking when you have that uncertainty of not knowing if you're going to be making that team or not, even though you've done your job, but it relies on so many others too. So I feel like it's one of those things as an athlete, it's like being in a match. It's like being in a game where you can never predict what's going to happen. You just have to keep steady with that ship and just hold on sometimes, and just know that as long as you do your job, things are going to hopefully go your way.
Well, one thing that is for certain, Nathan, is we're out of time on the program. So thanks to you at home watching and listening. For Nathan, I'm Alex. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to Parasport Nation. Like and subscribe to the channel to follow us now.